Hello everybody, in this video I'm going to be reviewing volume number 4 of the dark fantasy light novel series Goblin Slayer. Hello everybody, and welcome to my review of volume number 4 of Kumo Kagyu's light novel series Goblin Slayer. This one released in English by Yen On. If you want to pick yourself up a copy, I do have links in the description down below to Amazon.com or the Book Depository. Both are affiliate links. Anything you buy after clicking on those links helps the channel, so I really appreciate you using them. A couple things about this volume right out of the gate that are probably important for you to know. This one is a short story volume. There's actually 10 individual stories, so they're varying lengths. The volume's not really of any extraordinary length. It's about 200 pages, my print copy. So each of the stories are, a couple of pages each, which I think actually works to their benefit because a lot of them are very much focused on sort of a slice of life type feel, and the fact that they're a bit shorter helps them not get too boring, because if you're used to this series, it's generally a fairly violent and fast moving series, so to kind of dial the pace back a bit might feel a little weird if you're not into that as much. So like I said, it's kind of good though. They don't dwell on things or drag things out. The stories are just kind of nice little vignettes of mostly side characters. The other thing to sort of come right out and say is we do have one of the stories being set in a goblin den, and there is a woman who is being raped and tortured. The book, as in the other books in the series, it's not gratuitous, but it is definitely disturbing and a bit upsetting. Definitely if you have problems with those kind of things being depicted, if, God forbid you've had any kind of situation where you have dealt with that kind of assault, probably not the series for you. Of course, this is volume number 4. I've pretty much said that for most of this series. It's really not going to be for everybody. That aspect of it has been entrenched as a part of goblins and of the world and everything else. Like I said, the author is not overtly graphic, which I appreciate. If you've seen the manga, you know that that's actually kind of the opposite tract that the manga takes. It is actually quite a bit graphic, which I'm going to just say right off the bat, they've recently announced an anime adaptation of Goblin Slayer. I'm kind of curious about just how that's going to work. My kind of fear, I would say, about it is that it is going to go for the graphic sensationalization, and that the initial release will be heavily censored, and then we'll get like the Blu-ray uncensored version, which they will probably do to try and boost sales, which is really unfortunate. And and the thing is that with this series, and I mean this volume being a short story volume is kind of a good example of it. The series doesn't need that to work. It doesn't need that to sell. I think that like goblins as they are portrayed in here, that aspect, well, it is definitely not something a lot of people want to read in their fun books. Like I said, it is built into the whole world building aspect of it, and it certainly goes a long way to demonstrate why, even though Goblin Slayer himself as a character is not seen as being this incredible hero, because he doesn't do things like fight dragons or demon lords or stuff like that. That to a lot of average common villagers and stuff, he is this ray of hope in a way, because he does take on these missions that a lot of the more skilled warriors consider beneath them, and that a lot of the low rank adventurers fail at, and in fact often end up becoming victims. So again, I've always had sort of mixed feelings about that aspect of this series, because once you get away from that, and I mean, it is a very, like I said, there's 10 stories in this. That is a very, very small component of this book. The other stories, as I said, mostly feature secondary characters, even some really secondary characters, like, ones that we've just kind of seen in passing very briefly, to be honest. Like the book opens up with Rookie Warrior and Apprentice Priestess, that are two characters that we hardly have anything to do with in the previous 3 volumes. And sort of their day trying to, survive, basically, because they're two kids that have come from a small village and they've come to this city. They pretty much have just enough money to try and scrape by. They don't even have enough to get home. This is the other thing that I was a little, but I wouldn't say I was put off per se, but I was kind of like, I don't know if that's handled the best, is that at one point, Apprentice Priestess actually says, like, if we don't make this work, I'm going to have to become a prostitute in order to survive. And it was just a little too easy, that conversation about prostitution. I guess we could argue that it's a reality of sort of a medieval society, but I don't know. Like, for a book that's being written for a modern audience, it just seemed like a little too easy and a little too sort of flippant a thing to say, or to just sort of consider. Although, maybe at this point, like, you're at such a point of desperation, that's just kind of like the reality that you have come to accept. That's kind of how I sort of moved ahead with it. I was kind of like, well, I guess at this point, this is the reality they live in, and they have just come to accept that this is the alternative, and so that's why they're pushing themselves so hard. Now, we do have a number of other stories that feature far more prominent secondary characters, like High Elvish Archer, Priestess, although I guess it's arguable whether Priestess is technically a secondary character, but Priestess, Cowgirl, Guild Girl, Dwarf Shaman, Lizard Priest. We have a number of stories that feature them. For instance, with Dwarf Shaman, Lizard Priest, and High Elvish Archer, we see their first meeting. We see them on their initial travel towards meeting up with Goblin Slayer for the mission that we see them take part in volume number 1. All of the stories in this book are set between either volume 1 and 2 or volume 2 and 3. There's nothing set after volume number 3. For that, we're going to have to wait for volume number 5. We also have sort of, just like I said, very much slice of life things, like, what do characters do when Goblin Slayer's not around and they've got some time off that they're not adventuring? So we see some of the girl characters go clothes shopping. We see sort of the perhaps initial start to Priestess's somewhat revealing outfit that we saw in volume number 3. I kind of like the fact that, we have a lot of fantasy manga, anime, light novels that feature women in very, very scantily, like they're pretty much just like armored bikinis. I do appreciate that we have female characters who look at that kind of stuff and comment about how ridiculous it is and how exactly is that supposed to be useful and helpful. We also then, of course, do have a couple of stories with Goblin Slayer himself, seen from other points of view. There's one short story that looks at Goblin Slayer from a young boy's point of view. There's actually the one, like I said, that takes place in the Goblin Den. A lot of it is told from a goblin's point of view, which I think is probably what makes what goes on in that Goblin Den seem even more disturbing, because it's being told from the point of view of a creature that doesn't view a human being as a human being, and that objectification and degradation is probably what makes it seem even worse, which, ultimately makes it far more satisfying when Goblin Slayer does his thing. Probably my favorite story, though, of all of these, is a story that sees Goblin Slayer team up with Heavy Warrior and Spearman to go out and investigate the sudden appearance of this massive tower. The three of them are such different personalities, and the way they play off of each other, it's actually a really funny and comedic story at the same time that it does still have a bit of action to it. And the way that it ends, I laughed out loud at. it was just such a perfect ending to it, particularly just how it was put forward that that's what we should do. It was my favorite of all of them. Like I said, showing that this series is capable of doing not only a bit of action, but also having a little bit of comedy to it, and just, just character comedy. All in all, like, I mean, I'm going to say that this volume obviously is a fairly disposable volume. I didn't really see a whole lot in this book that made me go, wow, that's going to be important down the road. There is one little short story that features Hero, who is the character that slayed the Demon Lord. I have to think that she's going to show up down the road, so maybe this is our first time actually seeing that character other than just hearing about her. So that maybe that's a little bit. I think really what it boils down to is that if you're a fan of the series, there are definitely stories in this book that you're going to enjoy. There are definitely probably some stories that, depending on what you enjoy in this series, you may find a little bit boring. If you really love the really dark, dank dungeon diving and violence of this series, probably about 2/3 of this book is going to seem kind of like boring to you and is not going to be the stuff that you like. If, on the other hand, you are kind of enjoying the characters themselves and you're interested in seeing a little bit more of the characters, even including like what they do when they're not adventuring, and sort of seeing, the relationships between these characters that have been operating in very separate circles, how they are becoming friends and growing close, and ironically doing it because of their contact with Goblin Slayer, who is probably the most socially inept character in the entire series. That part is still entertaining. And like I said, for me, I enjoyed reading those parts because I do like the characters. I do like the banter that goes on between the characters. The initial meeting between the trio of Dwarf Shaman, Lizard Priest, and High Elvish Archer was as entertaining as their interactions always are. Like I said, the really standout one, of course, Goblin Slayer, Spearman, Heavy Warrior. The other ones, like I said, very fun, much more laid back, except for, the one or two other darker ones. But the majority, very much slice of life, very much about these characters gaining relationships, gaining friendships, and strengthening sort of that character element of this series, so that it isn't just, blood, guts, and, other unmentionable, terrible type of things. So, again, this is probably a mixed bag volume. And I know that there's going to be stories in here that some people aren't going to enjoy just because they are very different from what we see in the majority of the previous volumes. I think if anything, it's probably just going to make you more excited to get on with the story in volume number 5. The only thing about this, reading this volume and just sort of thinking about Goblin Slayer in general, the one thing that I really think that this series is going to need soon is sort of a bigger story. We have had all these little hints about, the gods and Goblin Slayer, and, he won't just roll the dice and stuff like that. And I think that there was a missed opportunity in this short story volume to maybe play that out a little bit. And I would really like to see that developed more into a overarching story, because right now we've just been having sort of these individual dungeon dives, which I've enjoyed, don't get me wrong, but I just think that this story, to show some growth over time, could really use something that's a little bit more deep and meaty as opposed to just, your one-off sort of dungeon battles kind of thing. So all in all, volume number 4, if you really like Goblin Slayer and you've enjoyed all aspects of Goblin Slayer, I think there's probably a lot of stories in this book that you will like. If you are much more into the let's just get down to killing stuff kind of aspects of Goblin Slayer, probably about 1/3 of this book will be up your alley, but the other 2/3 you might find a bit boring. All in all, though, it's okay, but still somewhat disposable. Certainly doesn't feel like a short story volume like some of the more recent ones that I've read, where they were vital to the series, vital to your understanding of the series and the stories that are going to be told going forward. Really doesn't feel that way with this one. Just feels like a bunch of different little short stories that the author felt like writing and threw together into a book. So those are my thoughts on volume number 4 of the light novel series Goblin Slayer. My next review is going to be on a volume number 2, and that's going to be volume number 2 of The Empty Box and Zeroth Maria. Now, the first volume of this series absolutely blew me away. Even though I've got quite a few books that I want to get caught up on because they came out longer ago, I'm just kind of really excited about reading this one to see how the story progresses, just to sort of see how much of a, maintaining or dip or maybe rise in quality of the story, although I have heard from a lot of you that this is one of the weakest volumes of the series, so we'll see how I kind of feel about it. But like I said, because of volume number 1, I was really excited to give this one a read, so that will be my next review. So if you love light novels and you're brand new to the channel, you should consider subscribing. I do 2 to 3 reviews every single week, as well as a weekly countdown of the top 10 best-selling light novels in Japan. Thank you so much for joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.